The freight train cuts through the Texas prairie like a wound across pale skin. Inside the cattle car, 23 German prisoners sit in silence, broken only by the clatter of wheels on track. The air smells of sweat, antiseptic, and something deeper, the metallic scent of fear. Lieutenant Franz Adler leans against the wooden slats, his left leg ending in bandages where his knee used to be. Before the war, his fingers danced across piano keys in a Munich conservatory. Now those same fingers grip a crude crutch carved from pine. He is 32 years old and feels ancient. Across from him, Private Klaus Weber stares at his hands, both missing 3 fingers each. Next to Klaus sits Sergeant Otto Brenner, his right eye covered by a leather patch stained yellow from infection. They are the wreckage of Normandy, collected from field hospitals and shipped across an ocean to a land they'd been taught to hate. "They'll work us to death," Klaus whispers. "Like we did to the Russians." Otto spits. "Better than what we deserve." Franz says nothing. He watches the landscape through gaps in the wood, endless sky, cattle grazing, a farmhouse with laundry dancing on a line. A woman stands in the yard, shielding her eyes against the Sunday. When she sees the train, she doesn't curse or throw stones. She simply watches, expressionless, then returns to hanging sheets. This confuses Franz more than hatred would. The train slows as they approach Huntsville. Through the slats, Franz sees the camp rows of white barracks surrounded by wire fencing, guard towers at each corner. But something is wrong. The compound is too clean. There are vegetable gardens, a baseball diamond, buildings that look like they have actual roofs. "It's a trick," Klaus says, voice cracking. "They want us to relax before what?" Franz asks quietly. Klaus has no answer. The doors slide open with a metallic shriek. Sunlight floods the car, blinding after 3 days of darkness. American soldiers stand on the platform, young men in pressed uniforms, rifles held casually across their chests. One steps forward, a captain with silver hair and tired eyes. "Welcome to Camp Huntsville," he says in careful, accented German. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will receive medical care, food, and shelter. You will work, but not beyond your physical capacity. Is this understood?" The prisoners exchange glances. Someone laughs a bitter, disbelieving sound. "Is this understood?" the captain repeats, firmer. Franz raises his hand. "Sir, we understand the words. We don't understand the meaning." The captain's expression softens almost imperceptibly. "You will. In time, they are helped down from the train, actually helped, soldiers offering arms to the men who cannot walk unassisted." Franz refuses at first, pride keeping his spine straight. But on the 3rd step his crutch catches, and he stumbles. A young private catches him before he falls. "Easy, friend," the private says. "No rush. Friend." The word sits strange in Franz's ears. They are led through the gates in a shuffling line, the able-bodied supporting the wounded. Franz notices details that don't fit his expectations. Soap and towels stacked outside the barracks, actual mattresses visible through open doors, the smell of cooking food that doesn't make his stomach turn. In formation outside the administrative building, they wait while names are called and assigned. Franz studies the guards. They look bored. Not cruel, not eager, just men doing a job they'd rather not be doing. Like conscripted teachers or farmers in uniform. When his name is called, Franz hobbles forward. A clipboard-wielding sergeant looks him over, notes the missing leg, writes something down. "Medical barracks, bed 14. Report to the infirmary at 0800 tomorrow for evaluation." "And then?" Franz asks. "And then we figure out what you can do." "Everyone works here, Lieutenant. But we don't kill ourselves doing it." Franz is dismissed to his barracks. As he makes his way across the compound, he passes a group of American soldiers playing cards on a bench. One of them nods at him. Just a nod. Not hostile, not friendly, just acknowledgement. Franz nods back before he can stop himself. That night, lying on a mattress that doesn't smell like death, Franz hears Klaus crying softly in the next bed. He wants to offer comfort but has none to give. He stares at the ceiling and tries to remember what hope feels like. Outside, someone is playing a harmonica. The melody is American, but the sadness is universal. The infirmary smells like iodine and coffee. Franz arrives at dawn, expecting military efficiency and cold hands. Instead, he finds Dr. Margaret Hayes humming while she organizes bandages on a metal tray. She is perhaps 28, with auburn hair pinned back and hands that move with practiced confidence. When she sees Franz in the doorway, she smiles not broadly, but genuinely. "Lieutenant Adler, please, sit." Franz lowers himself onto the examination table, wooden leg extended awkwardly. Margaret pulls up a stool and begins unwrapping the bandages with gentle precision. The wounds beneath are angry, red, weeping in places where infection has taken hold. She doesn't flinch. "When did you lose it?" "July. Neocon. Artillery? Tank tread." Margaret nods, cleaning the stump with antiseptic. Her touch is so careful that Franz almost doesn't feel it. "You're lucky. The amputation was clean. Whoever did the surgery knew what they were doing. A French doctor, Franz Adler, in a barn. Then you're very lucky." She works in silence for several minutes, applying new dressings, checking for signs of necrosis. Franz watches her face, looking for disgust or anger. He finds only concentration. "You were a musician," Margaret says suddenly. "It says here you taught piano." Franz blinks. "How?" "Your intake form." They ask everyone their profession. She ties off the bandage and sits back. "Do you miss it?" The question catches him off guard. No one has asked him about music since before Normandy. "Every day." "What did you teach?" "Bach, mostly. Some Beethoven. Mozart for the beginners who wanted to feel accomplished." Margaret's smile widens. "My mother loved Bach. She used to play the Goldberg variations when she couldn't sleep. Drove my father crazy." "Your father had no taste." The words slip out before Franz can stop them. He freezes, waiting for anger. Instead, Margaret laughs a genuine, warm sound that seems impossible in a room that treats enemy wounded. "He'd have agreed with you," she says, standing. "Come back in 3 days. I want to check for infection." "And Lieutenant?" She pauses at the door. There's a piano in the recreation hall. It's out of tune, but it plays. If you can get there, it's yours. She leaves before Franz can respond. He sits on the examination table for a long time, staring at his bandaged stump. In Munich, the propaganda radio had called Americans barbaric savages who tortured prisoners for sport. But this woman, this enemy, had touched his wounds with more gentleness than his own commanders had shown when he could still march. Outside the infirmary window, he sees prisoners walking freely between barracks, talking, smoking cigarettes. No one is being beaten. No one is screaming. Franz doesn't understand this place. He doesn't trust it. But for the first time since the beach at Normandy, he doesn't actively wish for death. It is the smallest possible beginning. The compound settles into routine. Mornings begin with roll call. Then breakfast, actual eggs, bread that isn't sawdust, coffee that tastes like coffee. Franz learns that prisoners who can work are assigned to details. Some tend the vegetable gardens, others repair equipment, a few work in the kitchens. Those too injured for physical labor are given alternatives. Franz finds himself teaching English to the younger prisoners' boys, really, 17 and 18, who'd been drafted in the final desperate pushes. They sit in the shade of the mess hall, practicing phrases they never imagined needing. "My name is Johann. I am from Stuttgart. The weather is pleasant today." Franz corrects their pronunciation, though his own English is imperfect. It feels absurd, teaching the enemy's language to soldiers who should be learning Russian for the Eastern Front. But the war feels distant here, separated by an ocean and a reality that makes no sense. In the evenings, after the work details return and dinner is finished, prisoners gather in the recreation hall. Someone found a battered guitar. Another man carved a flute from scrap wood. Franz discovers the piano Margaret mentioned, a scarred upright with missing ivory, strings that buzz, pedals that stick. It is the most beautiful thing he has seen in 2 years. He sits at the bench, fingers hovering over the keys. Around him, Conversation stops. Even the American guards pause to watch. Franz plays the opening of the Goldberg variations slowly, carefully, relearning the maps his hands once knew by heart. The notes come out thin and tinny, but they come. For 4 minutes, the war doesn't exist. There is only mathematics made into beauty, patterns that transcend borders. When he finishes, no one applauds. The silence feels appropriate. An American guard approaches a corporal named Daniel Wright, whose accent marks him as Southern. "That was something," he says quietly. "Would you teach me?" Franz stares. "You want to learn?" "Always wanted to. Never had the time." Daniel shifts his weight, suddenly awkward. "I understand if you'd rather not. Teaching the enemy and all." The irony isn't lost on Franz. Tuesdays and Thursdays. After dinner. Bring paper if you want to learn notation. Word spreads. Within a week, Franz has 6 students, 3 prisoners, 3 Americans. They sit together at the piano, stumbling through basic scales, and no one seems to notice the uniforms don't match. But not everyone approves. Captain Dieter Kraus, a former SS officer being held in the same compound, watches these gatherings with open contempt. He corners Franz after one lesson, voice low and venomous. "You disgrace yourself, teaching them, smiling at them. Have you forgotten who you are?" Franz adjusts his crutch. "I remember exactly who I am. I'm a teacher who lost his leg, fighting for a regime that burned books and murdered musicians." "What are you?" Kraus's face darkens. "A soldier who remembers his oath. Your oath was to a madman. Mine was to music. I know which one survives." The confrontation draws attention. Captain Reynolds, the American commander, steps between them. "Is there a problem?" "Gentlemen." Kraus spits at Franz's feet and walks away. Reynolds watches him go, then turns to Franz. "Be careful. Men like that are dangerous when they feel powerless. Men like that are always dangerous," Franz replies. That night, Franz finds his sheet music torn to shreds, scattered across his bunk like snow. Klaus helps him gather the pieces in silence. They sit on the floor, trying to tape pages back together. But some things can't be repaired. "He's right, you know," Klaus says finally. "We are fraternizing with the enemy." Franz doesn't look up. "Then maybe we're the enemy of the right thing." Outside, someone starts singing in German an old folk song about rivers and home. American voices join in, stumbling over unfamiliar words, getting the melody wrong but trying anyway. Franz closes his eyes and listens to the sound of enemies learning each other's songs. December brings cold that surprises the Germans. Texas winter is nothing like Munich, but it cuts differently. Dry and sharp. The prisoners fashion coats from blankets, wrap rags around their boots, and wonder if they'll see another Christmas after this one. The answer comes from an unexpected source. Reverend Thomas Calloway, pastor of Huntsville's First Methodist Church, arrives at the compound in mid-December with a proposal. He is 60, gray-haired, with eyes that have seen too many funerals. He speaks to Captain Reynolds in the administration building while Franz and a dozen other prisoners work on repairing the compound's fence. When Reynolds emerges, his expression is complicated. "Lieutenant Adler, I need you to translate." Inside, Reverend Calloway sits with his hat in his lap. "Young man," he says to Franz in English, which Margaret quietly translates. "How many of your men are Christian?" Franz blinks. "Most, I think. Lutheran. Catholic. Why? Because it's Christmas. And no man should spend Christmas behind wire if there's an alternative. The proposal is simple and impossible. Christmas Eve service at the church, prisoners and townspeople together. A meal afterward. Supervised, of course, but as close to normal as war allows. "It's madness," Reynolds says, but his tone is uncertain. "It's faith," Calloway counters. "And if we've lost that, the Germans have already won." Reynolds looks at Franz. "Would your men accept this? Come peacefully, behave appropriately. Return without incident?" Franz thinks of Kraus, of the hardliners who still give stiff-armed salutes when they think no one is watching. Not all of them, but many would. Those of us who remember what we're supposed to be. Then those are the men I want, Calloway says. Christmas Eve arrives with unexpected snow, just a dusting, but enough to make the world clean. 20 prisoners, carefully selected, are loaded into trucks and driven into town. Franz sits in the back, watching Huntsville pass by through the canvas flaps. Houses with wreaths on doors. Children building snowmen. A world at war, pretending to be at peace. The church is small, wooden, older than Texas itself. Inside, it smells of pine and candle wax. The townspeople are already seated, farmers, shopkeepers, their families. They turn to watch as the prisoners file in, and Franz sees everything. Fear, curiosity, anger, pity, confusion. But no one leaves. They sit in the back pews, these broken soldiers in mismatched clothes. The service is in English, which few understand, but the hymns are familiar. When the congregation rises to sing Silent Night, Franz hears German voices joining, tentative at first, then stronger, singing in their own language while Americans sing in theirs. 2 languages, 1 song. The same plea for peace. After the service, in the church basement, tables are laden with food the townspeople have contributed despite rationing. Ham, potatoes, pie made from canned fruit. Margaret is there, serving, and when she sees Franz, she guides him to a seat. "You came," he says. "I wasn't going to miss this." She sets a plate in front of him. "Eat. You're too thin." Across the table, an elderly woman sits with her daughter. The woman stares at Franz with open hostility. Finally, she speaks in German. "My son died at Anzio." Franz sets down his fork. "I am sorry. Are you? Would you have killed him if you'd met him there?" The question hangs in the air. Franz doesn't look away. "Yes, if it was him or me. And I would have been wrong to do it. Just as wrong as I am to be alive while he's not." The woman's face crumples. Her daughter reaches for her hand, but she pulls away and leaves, her footsteps echoing on the wooden stairs. Margaret touches Franz's shoulder. She lost both her sons. Her husband, too, in the First War. Christmas is hard. Everything is hard, Franz says quietly, but we keep doing it anyway. Later, as the prisoners prepare to return to camp, Reverend Calloway shakes each man's hand. When he reaches Franz, he presses something small into his palm. A wooden cross, simply carved. "Remember this," the Reverend says. "Remember that even in war, we are called to love." Franz closes his fingers around the cross and nods, unable to speak. January brings news that shatters the fragile peace. Rumors spread through the camp like poison stories of German POWs executed by Soviet forces, of Americans retaliating for concentration camps, of justice served cold and final. The stories aren't entirely untrue. Even behind wire, information seeps through. Letters from the Red Cross, whispered conversations with guards who've heard things they weren't supposed to hear. The world outside is learning what Germany did, what Franz's country did. Kraus seizes the moment. He gathers followers in the barracks at night, speaking in harsh whispers about betrayal and honor. "They're waiting," he hisses, "playing the long game, making us soft so we don't resist when they line us up." "That's paranoia," Franz argues, but his voice lacks conviction. He's seen the way some guards look at them now, eyes harder than before. The tension breaks on a Tuesday morning during work detail. A truck arrives carrying German newspapers, weeks old but recent enough to show photographs from Dachau, from Buchenwald. The images are scattered across the ground by wind skeletal figures behind wire. Bodies piled like cordwood, the machinery of industrial death laid bare. An American guard picks one up, stares at it, then looks at the prisoners with something new in his eyes. Not hatred exactly, something worse. Disgust, mixed with confusion, the look of someone who no longer knows what he's guarding. That night, Kraus moves. 3 of his followers attack a guard during evening rounds, not to escape, but to provoke. to prove that the Americans are no different, that violence is the only honest language between enemies. The guard, a young private named Miller, goes down hard. Franz hears the commotion from the mess hall and runs hobbles as fast as his crutch allows. He arrives to find Kraus standing over Miller, a piece of rebar raised like a club. Krause, stop. Why? So he can live to shoot us when the orders come? Because this proves nothing except that you're exactly what they think we are. Kraus swings. Franz catches the blow on his crutch, which splinters but holds. They grapple, two broken men fighting over which kind of brokenness deserves to survive. Franz is larger but one-legged, off balance. Kraus is whole but consumed by something that makes him weak. They're still struggling when Captain Reynolds arrives with 6 armed soldiers. Separate them. Now, rough hands pull them apart. Kraus fights until a rifle butt to his stomach doubles him over. Franz sags against the wall, breathing hard, his stump screaming where the prosthetic harness has torn skin. Reynolds crouches next to Miller, checking his pulse. The kid is breathing, unconscious but alive. Get him to the infirmary. He turns to Franz. What happened? Franz tells the truth. All of it. Kraus is plotting. The attack. The attempt to murder. He expects Reynolds to order mass punishment, collective reprisal. Instead, the captain's jaw tightens. Kraus and his men will be transferred to a maximum security facility. The rest of you stay. He looks at Franz. You stopped this. Why? Because he's wrong. About you. About all of this. How do you know? Franz gestures at the compound around them, the barracks, the gardens, the recreation hall where they'd sung together. Because if you wanted us dead, we'd be dead. Instead, you gave us piano lessons and Christmas dinner. Either you're playing the longest game in history, or... He trails off, unable to finish. Or we actually mean what we say about the Geneva Convention, Reynolds finishes. About treating prisoners like human beings, even when their country forgot how. Franz nods slowly. It's harder to believe than hate would be. I know, but it's true anyway. Kraus is taken away the next morning, still spitting curses. His followers go with him, leaving the compound quieter but cleaner, like lancing an infection. Margaret treats Franz's torn stump in silence. When she's finished bandaging, she says quietly, "Thank you. Miller is my cousin." Franz closes his eyes. I didn't know. Would it have mattered? No. But it matters that I know now. She packs away her supplies and leaves without another word. Franz sits alone in the infirmary, wondering if doing one right thing can balance a lifetime of being on the wrong side. He suspects not. But he's learning that maybe doing the right thing doesn't require balance, just the willingness to try. Spring arrives like forgiveness, sudden, unearned, transforming everything. The gardens explode with growth, and prisoners who'd spent years destroying learn to cultivate. Franz discovers he has a talent for tomatoes. His role in the camp evolves. The piano lessons continue, but he's also teaching English now to children from town whose parents work at the camp. They come on Saturday mornings, sitting cross-legged on the rec hall floor while this one-legged German soldier teaches them to read. Little Sarah Jennings is 7, gap-toothed, fearless. She brings him dandelions and asks impossible questions. Why did you fight us? Because I was told to. That's a dumb reason. Yes, it was. My daddy says you killed people. Franz sets down the book. Yes, I did. Sarah considers this, swinging her legs. Do you feel bad? Every day. Good. Mama says people who don't feel bad are broken inside. Your mama is a wise woman. Sarah nods seriously. She makes good pie, too. You should come to dinner. I don't think. I'll ask her. She says yes to most stuff. Somehow, impossibly, Mrs. Jennings does say yes. The invitation comes through proper channels. Captain Reynolds approves it with a bemused expression, probably curious to see if Franz will actually go. He does. On a Sunday evening, escorted by a bored guard who waits in the car, Franz sits at the Jennings family table and eats pot roast. Mr. Jennings is a farmer, quiet, with hands like old leather. Mrs. Jennings is round, warm, constantly in motion. Sarah chatters about school, about her cat, about everything and nothing. Sarah says, "You taught music before," Mrs. Jennings says. "Will you go back to it?" Franz cuts his meat carefully, one-handed. "I don't know if there's anything to go back to. My city is rubble. My school is gone. And I don't know if Germans will want to learn music for a long time. We've lost the right to beautiful things. That's foolish talk." Mr. Jennings says the first words he's spoken all evening. "Music don't belong to countries. It just is. Like rain or wheat. You don't lose the right to it no more than you lose the right to breathe." Franz looks at this simple farmer and realizes he's hearing something profound. "You're right. Thank you." After dinner, Sarah shows Franz her room, filled with dolls and drawings. One picture catches his eye: stick figures around a piano, labeled in careful letters. "Me and the German teacher. Can I keep this?" Franz asks. "Sure. I'll make more." Back at camp, Franz pins the drawing above his bunk. Klaus sees it and shakes his head. "You're going native. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just remembering what normal feels like." The following week, a package arrives from town, a care package, addressed to the German musicians. Inside are sheet music, pencils, a harmonica, and a note in careful handwriting. "For the men who taught our children that enemies can become friends. With gratitude, the women of Huntsville Methodist Church." Franz reads the note 3 times, then passes it around the barracks. Otto, the sergeant with one eye, clears his throat roughly. "They're thanking us. For what? For losing? For being locked up? For being human," Franz says quietly. "They're thanking us for being human." That night, the prisoners gather for an impromptu concert. Franz plays piano. Someone else plays the donated harmonica. Voices join in harmonies that blend German and American melodies. Guards sit on the steps to listen, weapons leaning forgotten against railings. Captain Reynolds watches from his office window, smoking his pipe. Margaret stands beside him, arms folded. "This is against every instinct," Reynolds says. "Fraternizing with prisoners. Teaching them that we're not monsters." "It's not against instinct," Margaret counters. "It's against training. Instinct is what's happening out there." She gestures to the music, the laughter, the gathering of people who'd been taught to kill each other. Instinct is recognizing your own humanity in someone else's face. Reynolds doesn't respond, but he doesn't look away either. In the rec hall, Franz plays the final notes of Amazing Grace, the American hymn he's learned to love. When he finishes, Daniel Wright, his first student, manages the opening bars himself, hesitant, imperfect, but unmistakably the same song. Franz rests his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Good. Again. This time, feel the spaces between the notes. That's where the grace lives." Daniel nods and begins again. Outside, spring deepens into summer, and men who'd been broken begin to heal in ways that have nothing to do with wounds. May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe ends. The news arrives via radio. Reynolds gathers the entire camp, prisoners and guards alike, to listen to the broadcast. President Truman's voice crackles through static, announcing Germany's unconditional surrender. In Berlin, the flags have changed colors. Franz stands in the crowd, feeling nothing. Around him, American soldiers cheer, embrace. Some cry with relief. The Germans are silent, a stillness that radiates shock and grief, and something like terror. Because if the war is over, what happens next? That evening, Reynolds addresses the prisoners. "You will remain here until the Red Cross can facilitate repatriation. For some, this may be weeks. For others, longer. But you will go home. You have my word. Home." The word tastes strange. Franz tries to imagine Munich, his mother's house, if it's still standing. His students, if any survived. The music conservatory, if it wasn't bombed. Everything as if. Klaus sits on his bunk, staring at his maimed hands. There's nothing there. No jobs for cripples, no food. The Soviets in the East, Americans in the West. What am I going home to? Life, Franz says, but the word sounds hollow. Others share Klaus's fear. Some prisoners ask Reynolds if they can stay work as laborers, become citizens eventually. The answer is always no. American immigration law is clear, and public opinion wouldn't tolerate keeping German soldiers on American soil longer than necessary. But the women of Huntsville have other ideas. They arrive at the camp with packages, clothing, canned goods, letters of recommendation for the Red Cross. Mrs. Jennings brings Franz a box filled with seeds, tomatoes, beans, corn, sunflower. For when you get home, she says. Something that grows might help everything else grow too. Franz tries to thank her, but she waves him off. Sarah will miss you. She's learned more from you than just piano. What else? That good people make bad choices sometimes. And that doesn't mean they stop being people. Sarah herself gives Franz a goodbye, present a drawing of him at the piano, surrounded by flowers. She's drawn his wooden leg as if it's natural. Unremarkable. Just part of who he is. Will you keep teaching music? She asks. I don't know. But I'll try. You better. You're really good at it. Margaret comes to say goodbye on his last day in the infirmary. She brings him a book, Beethoven's late quartets, annotated. These were my mother's, she says. I want you to have them. Maybe you'll play them again someday. Franz turns the pages carefully, seeing margin notes in faded pencil, a dead woman's thoughts on music, now passed to a former enemy. I can't accept this. You already have. Consider it stolen if that makes it easier. She smiles, but her eyes are wet. Play them for people who need beauty. That's all I ask. I will. I promise. They shake hands, the formal gesture feeling inadequate, and Margaret leaves quickly, not looking back. Franz sits alone with the book, wondering how he'll carry hope across an ocean when his own heart feels too heavy to lift. The night before transport, Franz can't sleep. He lies on his bunk, listening to the familiar sounds of the barracks breathing, snoring, Klaus's occasional whimper as nightmares take him. Franz thinks about writing a letter to Margaret but doesn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for teaching you that humanity survives horror? How do you apologize for wearing the uniform of monsters while trying to prove you're not one? He gets up, straps on his prosthetic, grabs his crutch, and makes his way to the rec hall. The piano waits in moonlight, streaming through windows. He sits at the bench and places his fingers on the keys but doesn't play. Instead, he begins to write in his mind, composing words he'll never send. Dear Margaret, tomorrow I leave this place that has been prison and sanctuary both. I should be grateful I am going home, such as it is. But I find myself grieving for what I'm leaving behind, not the camp itself, though it has been kind by standards that shouldn't exist. Not even the piano, though I will miss it desperately. I grieve for the proof that you and your people have given me, that the world is not entirely consumed by what we've done. That grace exists even for the undeserving. My country committed atrocities I still cannot fully comprehend. I did not participate in the worst of them, but I wore the uniform that made them possible. I followed orders when I should have refused. I told myself I was protecting civilization while helping to destroy it. You didn't have to treat us with dignity. You didn't have to bandage our wounds gently, or teach us your songs, or invite us to Christmas dinner. You didn't have to show us that your humanity was stronger than your hate, but you did. And because you did, I carry this impossible burden. I must go home and convince a shattered people that the world still has room for German music, German hope, German life, that we haven't forfeited our place in humanity's story. I don't know if I can do this, but I know I must try, because you tried first. Thank you for seeing a man where you had every right to see only an enemy. Thank you for hands that heal. Thank you for letting me teach your children, while my own country's children are orphaned by the war we started. I will plant the seeds Mrs. Jennings gave me. I will play the music your mother loved. I will try to build something beautiful from the rubble, knowing that beauty is possible because I saw it here, in this impossible place, in the space between war and peace. I will carry you with me, all of you, every act of unearned kindness. And when I am old, if I am allowed to grow old, I will tell people that once, in Texas, Enemies became something else. Something better. Forgive me. Forgive us if you can. And remember that some of us are trying to deserve your forgiveness. Yours in gratitude. Franz. He doesn't write it down. The words stay in his mind, perfect and unsent. As the sun begins to rise over his last morning in Huntsville, they leave at dawn 23 broken men climbing into trucks, carrying their few possessions in burlap sacks. The Americans have given them civilian clothes to replace their uniforms. But Franz keeps his army jacket. The medals removed, as a reminder of what he's trying not to be anymore. The entire camp turns out to say goodbye. Guards who'd once pointed rifles now shake hands. Kitchen staff press paper bags of food into their arms. Reverend Calloway leads a brief prayer, asking God to protect travelers in a dangerous world. Sarah runs up to Franz, her mother chasing behind. She wraps her arms around his waist and holds tight. You have to come back and visit. Ah, little one, I don't think I can. Then I'll come visit you. When I'm big, Franz crouches, balancing on his good leg. If you do, I promise I'll teach you Beethoven. The real pieces, not the simple ones. Will you write me? If they let me. If the mail works. If anything works. Sarah's mother gently pulls her daughter back. Go with grace, Lieutenant. The trucks start their engines loud. Final. Franz climbs into the back. Klaus, helping him up. As they pull away, Franz watches the camp recede. The gardens they'd planted, the barracks they'd called home, the rec hall where they'd made music with the enemy. At the gate, Captain Reynolds stands at attention and salutes. It's not a military salute. His hand doesn't touch his forehead, but rather the gesture of respect one human offers another. Franz returns it, awkwardly from the moving truck, and then the camp is gone, hidden by dust and distance. The train station is crowded with prisoners from other camps, all heading to ports for ships to Europe. They're a ragged army of the defeated, missing limbs, carrying scars, united only by their desire to see home again. On the platform, Franz sees Margaret. She shouldn't be here, it's not her duty, not her responsibility. But she's here anyway, scanning the crowd. When their eyes meet, she doesn't wave or call out. She simply stands there, bearing witness. Franz pushes through the crowd, Klaus steadying him. When he reaches her, they stand for a moment without speaking. I wrote you a letter, Franz says finally, but I didn't send it. Tell me one thing from it. He thinks of all the words he'd composed in the dark. That I will try to deserve what you've given me. Margaret nods. That's all any of us can do. Try. The train whistle blows boarding call. Franz reaches into his bag and pulls out the wooden flute he'd carved months ago. Keep this. Play it when you need to remember that music survives everything. She takes it, fingers closing around the rough wood. Play something beautiful. That's how I'll remember you. I will. He boards the train. Through the window, he watches Margaret standing on the platform, the flute in her hands. As the train pulls away, she grows smaller, then smaller still, then disappears entirely. But the memory of her kindness doesn't diminish with distance. 10 years pass like a dream and a nightmare. Franz returns to Munich in June 1945, to a city that's been bombed into abstraction. His mother's house is rubble. The conservatory is a shell. His friends are scattered dead, missing, in Soviet camps, emigrated. He lives in a displaced persons shelter for 8 months, then in a cramped apartment with 4 other families. He survives by teaching piano to children whose fathers aren't coming home, charging what little they can pay. Often he teaches for food a loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, once a live chicken he doesn't know how to kill. But he keeps the seeds from Texas safe, wrapped in wax paper, waiting. In 1947, he gets a job at a new school being built in the ruins, a place for children with disabilities. Funded by a coalition of churches and the Red Cross. It's called Friedensschule, School of Peace. Though Franz thinks School of Second Chances would be more accurate, he plants the American seeds in the courtyard, tomatoes, beans, sunflowers. The soil is toxic with rubble dust, but he mixes in compost and prayers and they grow. The first tomato that ripens makes him cry. He teaches music to children missing limbs, blind from bombing raids, traumatized into silence. He teaches them that their broken bodies don't mean broken souls. He teaches them American songs alongside German ones, insisting that music has no nationality. Some parents object they don't want their children singing the enemy's songs. Franz tells them, gently but firmly, that anyone who feeds you when you're starving and bandages your wounds when you're bleeding is not your enemy. Some parents pull their children out. Most stay. In 1955, an American aid delegation visits Munich. Franz hears about it but doesn't attend. What would he say? But then a letter arrives, passed through the school office. Dear Franz, I'm in Munich for 2 weeks with a medical mission. If you're still teaching, I'd like to see what you've built. If you'd rather not meet, I understand. But I've carried your flute across an ocean and back, and I think it wants to come home. Yours, Margaret. Franz's hands shake reading it. Klaus, who lives nearby and works as a groundskeeper, sees his face and asks what's wrong. Nothing is wrong. For the first time in 10 years, something is right. Margaret comes to Friedensschule on a Tuesday afternoon. She's older, they both are, with gray threading through her auburn hair. But her eyes are the same, measuring him with that mixture of competence and compassion he remembers. She tours the school, meets the students, admires the garden where American seeds have grown into German plants. When she sees the sunflowers 6 feet tall, faces turned toward light, she stops and stares. You kept them. I promised I would try to build something beautiful. You succeeded. They walk through the garden while children practice scales in the music room. Margaret points to the strongest sunflower, its head heavy with seeds. That's how hope works. You plant it in terrible soil, and it grows anyway. Then it makes more seeds than you started with. Franz touches the flower's stalk gently. The hard part is believing it will grow while you're waiting in winter. Yes, but you believed anyway. That evening, they sit in Franz's small office while he makes tea with shaking hands. Margaret produces the flute, worn smooth from handling, but intact. I played it, she confesses. Badly, but I played it. Every Christmas, I'd play Silent Night. It sounded terrible, but it felt necessary. Franz takes the flute, brings it to his lips, and plays a few notes. The sound is reedy, imperfect, alive. Music doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. Is that what you teach your students? It's what I learned in Texas. That broken things can still make beauty. That the notes you play after you've lost something matter more than the notes you played when everything was whole. Margaret reaches across the desk and takes his hand, his left hand, the one that still has all its fingers. You did it. You took what we tried to give you and turned it into something that lasts. You did the heavy lifting. I just tried not to waste it. That's not nothing. Most people waste their second chances. Through the window, they hear children singing a mix of German and English, the melody wandering but sincere. Franz recognizes the song, Amazing Grace, taught to a new generation who doesn't know it was once sung by enemies learning to be human together. Margaret smiles. You're teaching them our songs. I'm teaching them everyone's songs. Because Klaus was right. Music doesn't belong to countries. It just is. They sit in comfortable silence while the light fades and the singing continues. Outside, the sunflowers close their faces for the night, preparing to open again when dawn comes. Franz thinks about the 10 years he spent planting seeds in toxic soil, teaching children that loss doesn't mean ending. He thinks about Margaret's hands bandaging his wounds in a Texas infirmary, about Christmas in Huntsville, about the impossible grace of being treated like a human when he'd expected only justice. Thank you, he says finally, for coming all this way. I had to see if the seeds grew. They did. They're still growing. Good. Margaret stands, preparing to leave. Will you keep teaching? As long as I have hands to play and students who need to learn that broken things can sing. She nods, satisfied. At the door, she pauses. Franz? When you wrote that letter you never sent, did it say what I hope it said? He considers lying, then doesn't. It said that you saved my life. Not from death, from becoming someone who thought death was all he deserved. You saved yourself. I just held the door open. Then thank you for holding the door. After she leaves, Franz sits at his piano newer than the one in Huntsville, but still scarred, still imperfect. He plays the Goldberg Variations, the piece Margaret's mother loved. His playing is slower than it once was, his left hand compensating for the right that still sometimes forgets which fingers are missing. But the music is there. The beauty survives. In the garden, the sunflowers stand guard, their seeds ready to scatter when wind comes. Each seed carries the memory of Texas soil and German rubble, of enemies who chose to plant instead of destroy. Franz plays until dark, and in the music room, children begin to gather, drawn by the sound of something beautiful being made from brokenness. They sit on the floor, these young people who've known only war and aftermath, and they listen to a one-legged teacher play songs about grace. Outside, the world continues its slow work of healing. Inside, in this small room in a broken city, the future begins to take root, one note, one seed, one act of improbable kindness at a time. The music plays on. The flowers will bloom again. And somewhere in Texas, a woman plays a wooden flute badly but with love, remembering the day she chose to see a man instead of an enemy. Hope, it turns out, is a seed, planted in terrible soil, and it grows anyway. Then it makes more seeds than you started with, enough to scatter across oceans, across decades, across all the borders war tries to draw. Enough to last, enough to grow, enough